dealership here. If you'd like to stand, Brett. Pam's already standing. They are co-hosts. Thanks to all of you for taking time out of your family time and your other evening time that you might be doing something else. But we're hoping you get a lot out of this. It's been great fun having Hilda in town for a couple of days. I've known Hilda for almost 10 years, and I feel really blessed to have you here and to be able to share her stories with you as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Alan Almassey. Alan is our A&D director out of Chicago. And basically, I've been reporting to Alan for almost 10 years. And he and Hilda have been doing this all over the country. But when I say all over the country, truly only a few cities. We're really blessed that Minneapolis is only one of a handful of cities that's been able to host the event. So you've been able to carry the torch with Hilda. So with that, I'll turn it over to you so you can introduce Hilda.
Perfect.
And the rest of the
Thank
tales.
you. So, you know, as Robin said, the tour is called Tales of a Classic. Hilda is our classic.
You might want to move there so you can see the screen.
No, I can see it.
I will. You can't. Yeah, you really need to see the screen.
So,
Don't be shy.
yes, as I said, Hilda is our classic.
Can you see the screen? No, everybody needs to see the screen. Otherwise, you lose half of the.
So
what Alan has to say anyway.
So, in any event, the Tales of a Classic, we've been slowly working our way to the West Coast. You're doing LA and San Francisco next, but you've hit your hometown of New York, you've done Chicago, you've done DC, Houston, Boston, Dallas. So we're hitting probably the top dozen cities in the United States with Tales of a Classic. And this is something that Herman Miller very much wanted to bring to you. Hilda spent 20 years working in the Nelson Design office in New York City, and then came to Herman Miller, where she spent 35 years working for us. And she's filled with many memorable tales. The way tonight's program works is it's a Q&A session. So I'll feed Hilda a question, and she'll answer it for all of you. Or not. And there's somewhat of a logical sequence that this flows through. One of the fun things I've learned about doing this with Hilda is no event is like the next, because
D.J. Dupree was the founding father of Herman Miller, and he had read about George in Life magazine. George was the editor of Fortune in Life magazine. George was less a designer than he was a philosopher, a writer, an incredible speaker. He had written in Life magazine about a storage wall. That was his own concept, and DJ saw it and asked to meet with him. Gilbert Rohde had died. Gilbert Rohde had already started the transition from gingerbread to modern. So he asked George to come to Michigan and liked him and suggested that he come on board as director of design. And George said, I don't know anything about furniture. I really don't think I'm your man. And I think you should look elsewhere. So George came back to New York, and DJ interviewed several other more probable designers, didn't like any of them, came back to George and said, we really want you. And that was the beginning of an incredible relationship. I don't think there was ever a formal contract, to my knowledge. I think it was a handshake. And the relationship with George and Herman Miller went on for 35 years?
45 until 1986.
So it was a love story. Many, many years later, when Warhol became famous, we were then in a brownstone that we had bought that housed the Nelson residence above and the shop below. The files were all in the basement, and Andy, had become very famous, and his stuff was very valuable, so I decided I would find them. And I decided to, if I found them, that I would be gone. And I would leave George and become wealthy in my own right. So I spent 2 days in the basement going through every file. Ernest threw them out. 6 months later, George, the light went off in George's head, and he said, by the way, what happened to those Warhol renderings? And I said, I knew you were going to ask me that. I went through all the files in the basement. Ernest threw them out. I just wonder, his secretary, a Warhol secretary of 40 years, just found some in her closet, and it hit the papers. She had no idea what they were worth. Well, they sold them at Sotheby's for a lot of money. So I have no idea how much they would have been worth, but probably a lot of money. So I'm still working for a living. Is what it amounts to. So one day we got a big box of foam, and each piece was looked like a marshmallow. It was white. And so the designers decided to play around with it as a joke. So they were playing around with it, and Irving said, well, why don't we make a frame for it? This was all for fun. Well, Hugh Dupree came to town, and we had put this together. And he saw it, and he said, what's that? And we told him it's just for fun. And he goes, you know, I like that. Why don't we put it in the product vocabulary? So that's how that evolved. It was absolutely a silly joke. So they started manufacturing it in '56. We must have sold all of 10, and we took it off the market. So that's the story.
Now here's a photo of you on the marshmallow
This
sofa.
was 1956.
How did you end up as the model for the Nelson
Well,
sofa?
I was then still the receptionist, and we had no money. George took advantage of everything he could, possibly. And I was young, I was pretty, I was photogenic, and I was free. So I became his muse. And so I became the woman on the marshmallow sofa. And subsequently, whenever they had a prototype that they wanted to take pictures of, I sat in it. Now, in 1999, I was with Herman Miller, of course, and they decided to bring it back. And one of our marketing people was inspired about doing the before and after, and it became one of the most successful campaigns.